Hi, my name is Lawrence and I'm not an expert. In fact, I'm not much anything these days. I used to be a doctor, but since I retired, I genuinely think that my wife would prefer a puppy. But the point of this short video is to point you in the direction of some genuine experts who today have produced the Great Barrington Declaration, which invites us to take a critical look at the use of tightening of lockdown as a means of controlling COVID-19. Instead, they're suggesting that we should explore focused protection, whereby the vulnerable simply stay out of the way, and the young, the healthy, schools, universities simply get back to normal. Whilst, of course, at the same time, maintaining what we've learned, the best of what we learned, with regard to reducing transmission of the virus. For instance, hand washing, not going to work if you think you've got it, and so on. Implied in focus protection is upping our game in relation to track and trace, caring for the elderly, childcare, and so on. Now, coincidentally, I've been researching the facts as they stood at the 30th of September to look specifically at this idea of, is tightening of lockdown a good idea? And as these facts are reassuring, I thought I'd put them out there so as you can have a look and decide for yourself whether or not you think signing the Great Barrington Declaration would be a good idea. Based on what we actually know, not on anecdote. So what do we know? Well, let's look at the first slide. There is not a no-death option. We are looking at the least harm, a balance of harms. Yes, it's true, if we let the young, schools, universities return to normal, the current second wave will increase and we will see a significant rise in cases and quite possibly a rise in deaths, although that's not absolutely certain. But that puppy is starting to look more a reality for my wife. But on the other hand, if we continue or even enhance lockdown, there will be many knock-on effects. Education will be disrupted, with an incalculable effect on our youngsters, particularly the disadvantaged. And special mention needs to be made of universities as a major bringer in of foreign revenue, with all the microeconomies that depend on them. There will be job losses on a huge scale, depression, to an extent an unravelling of our social fabric, poverty on a scale that we've not seen for generations. But, and here's the point, there will be death. The Lancet calculates that this year alone there will be 10,000 years lost to cancer as a result of a diversion of resources from cancer services into COVID. It's not just cancer, it's heart disease, mental health, immunisation, many areas where deaths are occurring because of this crisis outside of COVID. These things especially affect the disadvantaged, and this is an interesting slide that shows how well we as a society, with our increasing prosperity, education and health, have begun to redress the premature death rates in the disadvantaged. And within a generation, this is the sort of effect that we've created. The reversal of this will cost deaths. I could leave it there, just saying, well, it's a balance of harm, balance that needs to be carefully looked at rather than just using a solution that has worked in the past. But there are a number of bits of good news with regard to the state of play as it was on the 30th of September, and I thought I'd share those with you. So firstly, rates are going up fast. The second wave is taking us to far more cases per day than occurred in April. However, when we talk about the doubling rate of positivity, of detection of cases, we're not taking into account the fact that the vast majority of those positive cases are because we're doing more tests. Furthermore, those positive cases, in the large majority of cases, are people who are suffering little or no significant long-term consequences of the virus. In April, the positivity rate for the tests we were doing was 10%. At the end of September, it was way, way lower than this. The proportion of positives is actually going down, not up. So if we can't use the actual number of positive cases as the barometer of our success in this battle, well, what can we use? Well, clearly the obvious measure to use is deaths, and in regard to that, there is good news. Before I show you that information, let me share with you 3 caveats. Firstly, when the government counts deaths, it's saying deaths associated with COVID. If you've had COVID in the last month and you die of COVID, that's a COVID death. But so is if you get hit by a bus or if you are about to die anyway. All of these are COVID associated deaths that we use the shorthand COVID deaths. Secondly, look at these figures for a typical month's deaths in the UK. In September, 600 deaths from COVID. Every one a tragedy. Terrible. I don't want to in any way leave you feeling that I don't appreciate the awfulness of that. However, in a typical winter month, we get 1,000 deaths associated with flu. And in September, about 50,000 people died of other causes. Now this is an important slide. What's the average behaviour of COVID? Well, most people who get COVID will have symptoms within about a week of getting it. And those who are going to get it severely will usually have been admitted to hospital within 2 weeks, and certainly will have usually been admitted to ITU within the first 3 weeks. Of those people who die, the typical death will have occurred within the first month. So with these things in mind, let's look at the COVID deaths as they were at the 30th of September, 6 weeks after the low point. So look at this graph. Here's the rate of infections, and now here's the rate of deaths. The death rate is maybe a fifth of what it was in April. A number of things could explain this. Those young people who are getting it are almost exclusively not dying. Maybe we're getting much lower viral loads than we were then because of the sensible things we're doing outside and distancing and hand washing and so on. Tragically, many of the truly vulnerable have already died, and a huge numbers of others are shielding, and that's part of the point of this declaration, is to enhance that activity. And then finally, treatments are better. So even when we're looking at patients in hospital, the numbers are not rising anything like as much as you might have expected from the rising number of cases. As at the 30th of September, ICUs in the UK only had about 1/5 of the number of COVID patients as they had at the peak in April. Now this is going to change. These ITUs will fill up. There will be deaths. But we have to compare this as to what might happen if we do tighten lockdown. Here's the second bit of good news. Look at this information with regard to the analysis of the first 30,000 deaths in the UK. 39 of those 30,000 were in healthy under 40-year-olds, 4 in healthy under 20-year-olds. words can't express the awfulness of those 39 individuals and their cases and their families. And our heart goes out to them. But compare that to the over 60s with pre-existing conditions, 26,000, a 700-fold difference. Death from COVID in the young is vanishingly rare. The third bit of good news, you can't get it twice. Yes, it's true that that the antibody levels fall, but we are beginning to see that cell-mediated immunity is maintained, and as it currently stands, now the virus might mutate in future and we may see a different situation emerging, but as it currently stands, there are, on the 30th of September, not a single documented case in the world, anywhere, of somebody dying of COVID, having had it for the second time. Fourth bit of good news, the vaccine. Vaccine isn't a distant dream that we can't take into account. The Oxford team are very hopeful that their vaccine is going to work, and their phase 3 and 4 trials, which are going to tell us the answer to that question, they hope will be wrapping up towards the end of next year. So it's not unreasonable for us to plan that within 2 years or so we should be rolling out a virus. Now, we may not be, but that's the plan. We're not trying to exterminate the virus off the planet. We are just trying to get through the next 2 years. The final bit of good news I found in my research was that although I haven't studied the Swedish experiment, it looks very similar to focus protection, and their new normal in their society is looking very encouraging, surely worth a second look. So, what am I saying in summary? It's a balance of harms. There isn't a no-death option. Do we tighten lockdown or do we go for focused protection? Which one is going to give us the least harm to our society in terms of death and in terms of other harms? Secondly, this is so self-evident. The bug targets the vulnerable. So should our policies. If you're over 45, well, wash those hands. Think twice about going to that rave. If you're over 60, especially if you're a man, continue the social distancing measures. Stay in your small bubbles. Stay out of the way of the virus. If you're particularly vulnerable, stay right out of the way of the virus. Thirdly, in complex systems where there are lots of complicated, interrelated causalities going on, run by human beings and their decision makings rather than robots, rules have a tendency not to work. We need principles. We need self-responsibility. Here's some example of those principles. Keeping the children in school, keeping the virus at bay, and so on. So, I hope I've given you enough information to help you make a decision. Please have a good think about this information and then check out this website. And I hope that you will also be joining me in signing the Great Barrington Declaration. Thanks very much for your time.